Do what thou will be the whole piece of law.
Welcome back, or if I haven't seen you before, welcome into my inner sanctum, where I like to discuss crazy people instead of getting a job. No, I kid you not, the production paralysis was real. I was sitting there applying, and I was like, I could be recording right now, but that would mean I would have to record, so It's bad. I'm experimenting with possibly moving back to the more involved videos every 2 weeks because some of the topics that I've been handling as of recent are very important and I want to give them the time and effort that they deserve. But I know that's not what you're here for. You're here for me discussing someone who's in the title and you probably either A, don't know about, or B, do know about and are curious to see how I'm going to unpack their magnum opus of a eclectic work, a resume posted online. See, it did wrap around because she was looking for a job, probably the most overqualified candidate to ever exist. But who am I talking about? Who could this possibly be? I want to talk today about Elizabeth Brady Cabot Winslow. Now, I must give credit where it is due. This was suggested to me by a viewer, and if you are a regular around here, you might already know who this is, but I must thank PSHITATHX and his comment suggesting this. I know the female Frances E. deck might not mean a lot to some people, but if you're a regular viewer of the channel, that is high endorsement. But she does not have as much of a repertoire as Frances E. deck. She has one job resume that was posted online in 2002, which is what we are going to be covering today. But you do need some important context as to her family line. She was born sometime in 1941. The date's unclear, but based on when she graduated high school, and by her own words, we can determine that her birthday is sometime in 1941. She was born of an Army captain, Hugh Winslow, and Elizabeth Brady Ferguson. Now, some other background information you should know is she was never married, which doesn't necessarily mean she had no children, but she also had no children. And she is used to luxury. By her own words, she lived as an Army brat, and also lived 7 years in Western Europe and Japan. She speaks multiple languages, being probably the most well-read person I've ever seen. She speaks fluently French, German, Latin, Italian, Spanish, Japanese, and Russian. Well, I've attempted to learn 3 of those, and I know one of those. However, that's not where her important credentials are. Her important credentials are where we get into her inheritances, because since we're dealing with someone of her caliber, possibly the smartest person to ever exist, the most talented, the most beautiful, but I'm getting ahead of myself, heiress of the Alita and Lowell Wadmond family fortune, and a senior partner of White and Case, being Lowell Wadmond, and their fortune. Well, don't just take my word on her ancestry. Let her tell you herself, because it is a key part of her credentials, is her noble blood. So she will go on to describe her descendants, quote,
I am the descendant of and related to historical, famous, and prominent individuals and families that go back perhaps several thousand years. My father, Colonel Hugh Whittaker Winslow, career Army officer. My mother, Elizabeth Brady Ferguson Winslow. My brother, Hugh Whittaker Winslow. Junior relatives and ancestors include Irish kings, European nobility, Oliver Cromwell, President Andrew Jackson, Nathan Hale, Zane Grey, Jane Addams, and families include Cabot, Zane, Davenport, Alexander Caldwell, Strong, McCulloch, Clark, Whittaker, Winslow, Broconier, Brady, Putnam, Ferguson, generals, U.S. congressmen, pilgrims, patriots, pioneers, landowners, judges, lawyers, manufacturers, writers, doctors, clergymen, corporate executives, educators, clearymen, and who was who recently? Cousin, high executive in Standard Oil of New Jersey, cousin, dean of Harvard Medical School, godfather, investment banker, godfather, high-ranking military officer, uncle, publishing, uncle, founded largest engineering firm in the world in its field at one time.
Thanks goes out to my roommate who is taking time out of his very quote-unquote busy day to do vocal work for me. I wish I could shout him out, but I'm giving him credit, so it counts. Continuing on, that's just her lineage. That doesn't count the multiple associates and acquaintances she has from very rich, famous, and prominent families, which include IBM, Aganelli, Mideastern Royals, high-ranking U.S. military forces, Air Force Chief of Staff, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, famous movie stars. I could go on, paragraphs on screen. Her breeding and and the cut of her jib is very important for you to understand her story. If you don't understand that she's coming at this from the, I am of noble birth, why are people treating me like this? It's important context. So, you may ask, how do I even know she exists in the first place? Well, someone told me. But aside from that, she published a resume looking for jobs because she was chronically out of work. I feel you. So, in this resume, if you read it as it is a confusing screed of unconnected events, qualifications, and then halfway through, it becomes a massive list of grievances against everyone in her life that she can name that she has ever perceived to have wronged her. So, I'm going to put it in a comprehensible order, and this is why this video took so long. Just trying to collate her entire life into a timeline was 90% of the writing process for this video. And I may include some little asterisks about certain things, but I want you to keep in mind that what I'm about to tell you now, until I remind you again, is that everything going forward I want you to treat as true unless I tell you otherwise. So, we say she's born in 1941. Now, in the 1940s, this would mean she is 0 to 9 years old. At 0 to 9 years old, she began writing and other activities, which include autodidact, which is just a really fancy way to say, I began to teach myself things, such as dance, ballet, operatic quality singing, classical piano, acting, art, inventions, and here's where I'm going to put the first asterisk, because she's not free of this. She includes that many of these works are often plagiarized. I could not verify this, but given her previous track record, I'm going to put an asterisk here. So, her often plagiarized events that began during this time are also solo, independent, original, publishable projects, research and notes on many topics, including literature, arts, sciences, humanities, business, psychology, mythology, medicine, law, economics, physics, military, philosophy, genealogy, education, horseback riding, tennis, ice skating, fishing, water skiing, skiing, and swimming. Okay, just for the sake of pacing, I'm going to just start putting etc. whenever she starts listing a bunch of things. Also, I hope you are liking the nice little overlay that I've put up for you to begin tracking the constant things, because this story you will very easily get lost. I understand that you can normally just put my video on in the background. If you ever get lost, just tune back into the screen, trying some new things to keep you involved. So if you're watching this dedicatedly, I appreciate you. But I also understand if you want to put this on the second monitor and do something else. But in the late 1940s, she began to no longer be an autodidact person, and she began to attend Columbia Academy, assumedly into kindergarten into her academic career. In the 1950s, generally, she will become a published and unpublished author. She does not list any of the books she published or did not publish during this time, so I have no way of pointing you towards what her bibliography would be. However, during this time, she also went to Japan and attended a Japanese school somewhere in here in the 1950s. In 1955, specifically, she attended the Greenwich Academy and did well enough to be on the honor roll. In 1958, she would leave Greenwich and move to Coral Gables, also on the honor roll. From what I've been told, Coral Gables is one of those very upscale high schools, which tracks with her regal bearing, quote unquote, if you can even say that an American has regal bearing. And another asterisk, this one might not be true. She accuses a family called the Knappins cause her brother to run away from home. Now, he quickly returns. However, I will tell you that the Knappins are going to be a boogeyman of this story if you pay attention. From what I can find, because the second you Google family name and you get a crest, these are very well-lineaged families. So, if nothing else, she's going to get very specific, and I'm also going to put the warning here that if you are mentioned in this video and you don't like it, because I understand this video involves a lot of real people that are still very much alive, if you're in this video and you don't like it or something that's said is false about you, please contact me and I will gladly cut it out, because I know I'm small enough at this point that it probably doesn't matter. I'm just putting this out there so no very powerful and well-lineaged people come down and say, you used my family crest or family name in a bad way and this person's just blatantly insane, because they totally are, but we haven't gotten gotten there yet. Blatant warning for everyone, auditorily and visually. Okay, we all under that agreement? Cool. Moving to 1959, she was invited to become a debutante in Rome for an international ball. Very prestigious. During this year, she also graduates Coral Gables in the top 15% of students at the school. Moving on to the 1960s in general, she says that these years were very close to her becoming very successful and famous. Her star's on the rise. She's very close to becoming who's who. But getting down to brass tacks and specifics, in 1960, after she graduates Coral Gables in 1959, becomes a debutante in New York City. This is going to be her main stomping ground. Another asterisk, her clothes were possibly stolen by a Ruth Timberlake Prokop and a Daryl Quinn at her debut in New York City. She works with the USDS as a secretary and receptionist as a summer job, and the aforementioned Ruth Timberlake got her thrown out of her dormitory for quote-unquote no good reason. Moving on to 1961, she works as a receptionist for USAID, as well as a secretary for Meade at the University of California. Now, Ruth Timberlake, being a recurring character in the 1960s, in 1962, Ruth Timberlake began to start malicious false talk that got me thrown out of my sorority by the same tactics. Now, this is another asterisked one. I could not confirm through the sorority history if that was possible. But given the track record of Ruth Timberlake from the self-described very non-partial narrator that we have, I'm just going to take anything she says with a grain of salt. Think of it as the Francis E. deck. It's probably partially true, but exaggerated in all the wrong ways. Also in 1962, something very bad and academically verifiable happens. She says a man named Giuseppe Mora made her severely ill for a long time, as well as confined her to the bed. This made her miss college classes, which damaged her academic career. And considering that she drops off the honor roll in 1962 to pick it back up again in 1963, I am inclined to believe her. She also says that this illness did not put her back to normal for several years. Progressing to 1963, she begins work as a showgirl for Vegas at the Sands Casino. Very prestigious. She also, during this time, gets better from her sickness inflicted by Mr. Mora. In 1964, she graduates from GWU, getting a bachelor's in international relations and minoring in international economics. She was on the dean's list for the majority of her college time, but as aforementioned, she dropped out of it because of sickness. Moving on from GWU, she then moves to France and attends the University of Paris. She also begins her modeling career with an agent known as Dorian Lee Parker. This relationship continues until 1965. Upon graduating the university and leaving France, she then no longer associates with her modeling agent and begins to attend the University of Heidelberg. The next year, in 1966, she graduates University of Heidelberg #1 on her final exams. She then goes back to France to attend the University of Poitiers for the French language. 1967, she joins the Episcopal Church of St. Bartholomew's Community Club. She also begins her associate editor career at McKinsey & Co. Now, these have been quite some uneventful years, but 1968 is when it begins to pick up a little bit. 1968, she joins the Daughters of Cincinnati. She also attends Columbia University in New York, New York for English literature. She leaves her associate editor position in McKinsey & Co., not without some trouble, but another asterisked thing is this is when she claims that hoaxes, fraud, and impersonations regarding my identity aimed at me began in New York City. From this time on, she will be struggling with that type of thing. However, back to verifiable things, she transfers to New York University from Columbia. She becomes a doctoral candidate in comparative literature and holds a GPA of above 3.5 while maintaining the Dean's List and a scholarship. She also works at the World Book Encyclopedia as an editor, researcher, and writer for just this year in 1968. Another asterisk event also occurs. She claims her Aunt Knappen almost killed her in a car accident when she was was driving. However, luckily was unharmed. In 1969, she begins working as a sole consultant for IBM. More general events that occur in the late 60s, which I will again have to asterisk, she claims that the Knappen family engage in severe defamation behind her back, as well as legal action against her to her face based on deliberate lies, maliciously causing severe trouble and financial losses for her parents and contributing to their divorce and trouble. She also mentions that she has issues with being the heir of the Wadman's fortune. From 1970 on, meaning these are going to be constant events, both of these are going to be asterisked. The first one being that she begins to claim that models, modeling agents, and theatrical agents all began to steal material from her, being modeling photos and the like. She also claims, number 2, her Aunt Knappen, Erwin Schaefer, States Coyle, Cousin Ted, and Catherine Laurel illegally ruined her career in different fields. This includes modeling and acting, and she specifically names Erwin Schaefer attempting to completely end her career in a field through illegal and nefarious means. Now, I remember, public information is by definition public, private information is by definition private. I cannot verify these claims. I can only take into account what she puts on her resume, if this is even still a resume at this point. In the 1970s, she says she was the basis of the lead in several films but was never credited. These include Fred Astaire, and I looked in Fred Astaire's bibliography. I think there's only like one that even might vaguely apply. She also stopped working odd jobs at this time, doing other activities. She was mainly locking down into a career. She also claims, another asterisk, that hoaxes, fraud, and impersonation regarding identity aimed at me began in LA. This is also on the resume portion, where she begins experience in legal procedures and court appearances, conservatorship, power of attorney, etc., things relating to wills and legal experience. Now, I don't know if this is because she appeared in any lawsuits, I don't know if this is because her parents were getting divorced, or some of both, but she lists legal experience in this time period, which means that it is going to be enumerated on this grand list of her entire life. In the early 1970s, why does it always come back to Christian Science? In the early 70s, she says that her Aunt Georgina and her cousins, Knappen, worked on her mother behind her back and were instrumental in brainwashing her with Christian Science. Now, if you don't know what Christian Science is, I gotta do a video on it at some point so I can point to it, but hold on. Elizabeth, could you tell me what the definition of Christian Science is?
Well, Christian Science is a combination of shared delusion, contradictions, and unanswered questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Winslow, for quoting one of my favorite videos on the subject. Is what I'm doing in my roommate considered harassment? Whatever. I'm gonna kind of gloss over it, not very important, but it will be a recurring factor in this story. If you know anything about Christian Science, not good. Some people describe it as a cult. Some people describe it as a legitimate religion. Other people are kind of indifferent to it. It is not Christian with scientific practices. It is denial of pain until the pain goes away. That's the best way I can describe it. However, she claims from the early 70s on, her aunt and cousin Knappen wrote hostile, crazy, and completely untrue and vicious letters and made similar phone calls for years to my father and to me and some to my brother. This is another asterisked one because this comes from the second half of her resume, which is less factual and more a list of enemies. Looking ahead, I'm now seeing that this is going to be mostly unverifiable things. So this is where we're going to descend into Winslow world, where things begin to decay, let's say. So unless I tell you otherwise, just assume that all of these are big allegedlys posted on every single one of these, just to not break the flow. During 1970, remember how I said she had that job at IBM? She leaves and then attends the University at Strasbourg, HB, and Weisbären, basically moving around Germany in her universities. Both of those are true. Where we begin to get into the unverifiable ones is where she names a bunch of people, namely the Wadmans, deliberately defamed her and conspired to get her disinherited. Now, this would be kind of believable. If she's becoming a burden to the Wadham family fortune, it would make sense that they're behind a way to get her disinherited. Erwin Schaefer is also mentioned as setting her up with harmful bums, tailing her, and Another frequent mention in the name of Walter Scholes begins to be a part of this story. Takes part in the disinheritance. She also claims that all of these people mentioned set her up for robberies and tried to squeeze her out of housing, as well as causing her to lose property she could not afford to replace or lose. She also claims that the Wadmans pressured her to leave her studio apartment to stay in a smaller, downsized room. She wanted to lease her apartment but couldn't find any leasers, and is frustrated that she does all this work for Dennis McCrary, moving her furniture in, and then forced her to move out after doing all this painting and work to nicen the place up, and I had to pay for another costly move and put all my possessions in storage and find another apartment, and I have no money. It took a lot of my time, and it completely destroyed my career and caused me massive financial loss, which you should be noticing a few concrete themes here, namely the fact she has no children, she was never married, she cares a lot about money, very interested in her career, should give you a basic idea of her personality. One of her cousins, Snappin, accused her, as well as her aunt, that she blacklisted her from McKinsey. Now, remember when I said she had that assistant manager job with McKinsey in Washington? Apparently, her cousin, Polly, tried to apply, but was not hired, and of course attributed that to the alleged wrong source that it was Elizabeth's fault. Now, if I know anything about Elizabeth as a person, reading through her entire resume and how she will immediately go and talk about her cousin Polly, I half believe that it's true, because saying like, oh yes, my cousin and her mother accused me of blacklisting her from this business, it's not true. I mean, they were just jealous of me, they were resentful of my superior brains, looks, glamorous life, TV appearances, beautiful pictures, etc. And they were all so vicious-tongued that I had to completely stop speaking to them. You know, is that something that you go and say like, yes, these people accusing me that I blacklisted them from this one company, complete lies. I could believe it if she went on to say, Polly was always so nice to me as a kid, I would never do such a thing, and if she merely called me, I would have given her a reference. No, that's not what she said. But getting back to more concrete facts, in the next year, 1971, bit of a smaller year, she associates with a modeling agent, Wilhelmina, but then proceeds in 1972 to no longer associate with this modeling agent. She then accuses Don Goodell of setting her up with a quote-unquote woman-like sleaze to live in my furnished apartment while I was modeling in Europe. So it sounds like her landlord set up someone else in her apartment while she was gone and then couldn't get it back because there was already someone in there, so she had to go. What I assume happened is she went to this guy named Don and said, hey, can you hold this apartment for me? And then Don said, well, you're gonna pay me the entire time? And she said, no, I mainly just want you to hold it until I get back. And then he set up someone else, which forced her to give up the apartment. Just speculation. Also in this year, after moving to Europe, she associates with talent agencies in Milan. However, in 1973, she ends those talent associations. A bit more speculation. She says that there was a robbery in Milan, which ended up in her losing her modeling book, 1,000 pounds of property, including writing and jewelry, and she blames this as the reason why she lost her talent association in Milan. It was not a, oh, I stopped being there because of my own voluntary choice. It was a, oh, I didn't have the things to associate with them anymore, so I just didn't. However, this Milan talent agency debacle did not deter her from associating with a man named Gavin Robinson for her talents, and 3 more ones to pursue an acting career by the names of Mort, Anne, and Jane. Not too bad. Things are picking back up. She doesn't really have much against her at this point. In 1974, she leaves her association with the Episcopal Church Community Club. She is also deliberately forced out of housing, allegedly due to the Wadmans. She also accuses a man named Seth Baker in New York City of stealing a very valuable, irreplaceable family heirloom, which she cites as financially ruinous, devastating, and severely damaging. She also leaves the university at HB and mentions Walter Schultz again. And if you haven't picked up on it, this kind of gives a lot more to her character. She says that Schultz referred to material in non-published notes that she had kept in her apartment, that she kept and she never showed them to anyone, and he could only have known about it by having someone illegally come in to copy them and read them. And he defamed my character and lied maliciously about my past and contacted the Wadmans, by the way, still air at this point, I believe, in New York City, and he lied to them and he set up an illegal, sleazy attempt to extort funds from me and tried to manipulate my father when he wasn't with me, because if you haven't picked up on it, she very much treasures her father. Her father was in the military. She says she's a self-described army brat, and she never really connects much with her mother, mainly because her mother is always going to be disabled to some degree, which may be going ahead a little bit, but based on the fact she associates with Christian Science, which their main thing is, oh, if you pray hard enough, you can cure any disease, which usually is a great attractor for people who have terminally ill diseases. People who can't get things easily cured will gravitate towards that, as well as some attestations we have from an alleged first-hand source about her mother always being in a wheelchair and being in a nursing home for most of her life. It's very easy for me to say that she is very much a daddy's girl, but that aside, moving on to 1975, she begins to pick up another acting talent, beginning to associate with Dale Garrick. Then moving on to more accusations, a big year for accusations in 1975, the Knappens went behind her back to her agents and employers and got her thrown out and fired in LA, maliciously contacting her mother's nursing homes, which is verification from her that her mother is ill, and lied about us having caused trouble for her and her father. If I had to guess, the reason for their divorce was partially motivated by her mother's illness. She also says that the Knappens, without her knowledge or consent, once again tried to contact a Christian Science practitioner and tried to extort her father into paying the practitioner. Now, I think these are connected. The contacting of nursing homes and then bringing up Christian Science again, I believe this is more evidence as to why my theory is more cement than sand. She also accuses the Knappens of making her leave and the acting agency she was a part of due to the poisoning of her agents' minds, as well as one of her cousins was conspiring to have a film made about her and her parents behind her back because she didn't know until it was aired on TV. I couldn't find this documentary no matter how hard I tried, so sorry about that. She also accuses her Aunt Knappen of poisoning the minds of the staff and conspiring against her and her father. Now, if they could do this, it means they didn't visit too often because the nursing home staff usually know who you are. Personal experience, if you go and visit a lot, they will usually know who you are. And she also names another army colonel who became a co-conspirator, lying to get into the nursing home so that he could continue to poison the minds of everyone there. She also says she changes her listed phone number during this time so that Knappens have no way to contact her or her father. However, this will not deter them. Don't worry, in case you were trying to root for the Knappens in this entire thing. She then takes aim at Walter Schultz again, saying that he repeatedly set her up without her knowledge or consent and tried to make her pay him for services that she had not agreed to. He also allegedly called all her agents behind her back and told them malicious lies and infuriated them, to which one of them threw her out. Also, another one that I probably could verify but couldn't find, she said she was wrongly sued and falsely accused by a court in LA. She also allegedly cleared the charges herself, probably where she gets that legal experience from. She also says that her cousins Ted and Nat Knappen are also lawyers who went behind her back and complained about her, which this is another one of those angles where people with, well, I'm not going to jump ahead because I don't want to pop that cyst yet, but this is another case of her boosting her self-worth. She's saying, yes, I can get these charges dismissed against two hardened lawyers who were also my cousins, but put that aside. After clearing that up in 1976, she begins to associate with an agent named Paul Kolner. She then also says her aunt flew out to LA to talk to her and the nursing home staff, which would contribute knowledge to films they were making behind her back about her family without her knowledge or consent, which I'm just going to point this out now. Just because you say it was done illegally without your knowledge or consent, or that it was impossible or any other words you want to throw at people, it doesn't really mean a lot considering that they just did it. Yeah, you can say it's illegal, but you have to prove that in court, and it sounds like she doesn't have the money to do so. Doing without her knowledge or consent, mean, but also not illegal. Maybe illegal, but also you have to prove it. So a lot of it just reads like Ho's mad, in my opinion. This is just her writing a bunch of things down. She moves on from this, however. In 1977, an incident with the Knappens, she alleges them of calling her agent, remember Paul Kolner, called him to get her in trouble, which resulted in her leaving the agency. So this also explains why during this year she disassociated with Paul Kolner and Dale Garrick. Another one of those things that happens to coincide with the date she put in the actual resume part, and the places and the things she put in the giant block of accusations part. This is also where Walter Schultz stops causing her trouble in 1978. She then says that in LA she was assaulted from behind and knocked down, and since she couldn't catch the face or didn't know who it was, obviously this can't be a random act of violence. She then says the most obvious thing, which is that a member of the LAPD living in her apartment complex or someone else that she knew set her up. And obviously that this LAPD cop was a lookalike for someone that she knew in LA, and she knocked on the door of the apartment. And this is corroborated in her words that the LAPD knocked on her door about another hoax, which sent her on a long wild goose chase about a fake medical alert pertaining to her. I don't know if this is like her mother's in danger or something else, but given the gap that's about to happen, we've usually had a nice year-to-year thing, but it is about to get a lot more eclectic, because what I'm going to say is the prime event that you should pay attention to in her entire story happens in 1982. This is going to be 4 years after her last update, and it is probably the most important one, as in early 1982, her father dies. And if her saying the line of, "I have been illegally run over by inferior trash since my father died," is any indication of how this year is going to go and how the rest of her life is going to proceed, because if me having to asterisk things hasn't tipped you off yet, it is strongly believed that Elizabeth Winslow has paranoid schizophrenia. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise if you were listening, or just know who she is as a person. But after this point, any event after 1982 should be highly questioned and taken with a big allegedly every single time. Every event after this is mainly going to be her going off the deep end and beginning to accuse everyone that she vaguely knows of anything bad that happens to her, and her life isn't going to get any easier. So, in the eventful year of 1982, just the events that happened this year, she says that a classmate described her as a genius back in the early 70s. She also joins Mensa. Now, if you don't know what Mensa is a giant organization of high IQ people that love to gather around and talk about and fillet how smart they are. High IQ individuals. You know, me having the recency bias with my nickel bull ass to go for Zathrid Gorkin instead of the veto that was going to kill me next turn. Yeah, not for me. We need the high IQ individuals like Elizabeth Winslow. Also, this is the year she cites that she was no longer in the running to be successful or famous. It's all downhill from here. She also stops writing during this time and no longer lists this period as her legal experience, so I assume this is where her legal troubles end. She also says that from this year on, hoaxes, fraud, and impersonations regarding her identity would be aimed at her in Northern Virginia and New York City at the same time. This year would also get worse, as she says that thieves and crooks would illegally tap into her residential and office phones, cut her off from her mail, and watch her with concealed surveillance that she couldn't locate within her apartment, as well as illegally reading her non-published material, and would also steal from her, plagiarize her, assault her, tail her, poison her, and just in general plague her with disturbances. She would also be set up deliberately with physical assaults, including deadly weapons, small boulders, and other such things, which she will attribute to the Nappins. And if this doesn't sound familiar to you, this really should sound familiar to the likes of Francis C. Deck and Antoine Artaud. People attack me for no reason, but this time it's people that I know, because I'm such a high society aristocrat. No one would ever wish me ill unless they had some specific reason to stab me in the back. But it gets worse. When she moved from Washington, D.C. to New York City, which is why it is linked regarding the impersonations in Northern Virginia back to New York City. I assume it's because it's around Arlington. However, during the move, she would drive a rented truck full of her possessions, aka several thousand pounds. Even after 1,000 got stolen from her in Milan, she must be insanely wealthy. Duh. That's like her entire portfolio is just, I'm rich, I have an aristocratic bloodline, please help me, I've only been as high as a secretary. Acted a couple times. She names a bunch of people that aren't going to come up again, but she will list in her list of enemies, will gang up on her behind her back and cut the brakes of her truck and have her car sideswiped while towing it and driving the truck alone. They set her up in a bogus apartment in Queens that she had paid for but could not move into, which then one of the people who allegedly cut the brakes of her truck and had her car sideswiped would say, "Why don't you move into my house?" Which she said it was a booby trap of set-up references to personal facts regarding me and my past, which I had not told her about. She was illegally scheming against her with all of the other enemies, and her motive was financial, that Elizabeth had brushed her off and refused to acknowledge or comment on her sly suggestions and insinuations. She says that she was a former classmate and that she had done these illegal acts before. She did not expect this trap, and as such, fell for it in a time of weakness. During this time, she also has more issues with the Wadmans, wanting her to meet prominent relatives and friends that she had in other fields, and also that the Wadmans allegedly illegally eavesdropped on her phone calls without her consent. I don't know why anyone would eavesdrop on your phone calls with consent, and others, and said that during this time, she was cut off from superior relatives, presumably because this is when the Wadmans are trying to disinherit her with the death of her father. Also, ever since she moved back to New York City, just a little bit of malicious hazing by insulting and hostile crooked people. Just a little bit, with the disinheritance, the move that went wrong, the people stealing everything from me, and people assaulting me for no reason, as well as plagiarizing, tailing me, poisoning me, generally plaguing me, all those things, just some rumors. Oh man. Hazing? Whatever. Wadman stole money from me? Who cares? They put me in a financial bind and gloated maliciously because they're trying to have me disinherited? It's all about the hazing. It's just a conflagration of bad things. That's not even the worst part, because that's just the things that happened this year. There's still more things she's going to list that will continue to happen. It's just this is the year that they start. Starting with those, someone tapped my phone. Cool. We already know that, par for the course. One more to the pile. This is where she will also lose all of her pre-1982 intellectual property, which she will list it all out. Education, intelligence, medicine, law, etc. She will also say that these were marketed by crooks for millions of dollars, probably because she is as rich and well-known as she is. Someone described as a very beautiful person. I mean, you've been looking at her for the whole video, so is she not? Who cares? The Wadmans and Schultz, as well as many others, by the way, big conspiracy going on here. This is where the conspiracy begins to lock her more into a bind. She will be bombarded and mobbed, as well as people will illegally bug and keep concealed cameras in her apartment and interfere with her phone calls and mail. This is stuff we already know. She loves saying it. Oh, they stole my non-published material. Oh, wow, I live in high crime areas and my stuff keeps getting stolen. Obviously, it must be targeted. It's not just the fact that I live in New York City and the crime rate is extremely high. Oh yes, they set up all these thefts, robbery, poisons, malicious crooked tales, physical assaults, and falls. They meddled with my mail. Oh, the greatest crime of all. I'm being assaulted, stolen from, and plagiarized. Obviously, the bail is the one thing that I need to be most concerned about. She also says, oh, these people placed rats in my house. She says that these bugs were broadcasting outside of her apartment. She has been illegally cut off from her more agreeable and important relatives, as well as her networks. Another one saying they set me up with these new illegal high-tech networks against me, of which I have no chance. Sadistic robbery sprees, freeloading, empire building, publicity making, people leeching off of her. That's what she's saying. These people are leeching off of me. They're taking me. I can't talk to my high important people who might be able to get me a job. These people are trying to disinherit me. All these people are setting up things against me. It's not that just I live in New York City and these awful things happen. Rats live in my house. They couldn't just possibly walk into my house. No way, impossible. They were all set up there, as well as she accuses a full conspiracy with the NYPD, NYNEX, and apartment employees, as well as people who live there. Everyone. She's like, I'm a part of Mensa. Well, these people, because I left their organization, are now setting me up. St. Bartholomew's, all these people, because I left, they are setting me up. All of my job interviews are falling through, not because I'm schizophrenic, but because they're setting me up. I can't keep up with the times. These high-tech things, they're blitzing me out, often illegally and deliberately. Is it making more sense? This is like the computer god. You could just put computer god. The computer god has blitzed me out, often illegally and deliberately, with these high-tech networks of connections, of which I have no chance. Sadistic sprees of robbery, freeloading, empire building, publicity making, malicious notorious dangerous stunts. Hostile women in historical societies have set me up for malicious hoaxes. If I told you that this wasn't Francis E. Deck, you could probably believe that it was Francis E. Deck, which makes me think that this is another instance of electronic surveillance, as well as paranoid schizophrenia. And for the record, she states that she does not like interference, illegal meddling, or unreasonable pressures on her for years. People illegally moving into her apartments, using them as labs for crooked experiments on her, so now she's being experimented upon, stealing, seizing papers, illegally getting visits. This is just all this. Why did I write this down all separately? This shows that I didn't really summarize it very well, because this is all just the same thing. Okay, here's new ones. They destroyed my peace of mind. Every day is an affliction. They did this through frauds, lies, pinning me down under their thumb, keeping me weak and poor, and in an inferior position, prostrated before them. All these people who are working against me, they wanted to force me to be their unpaid servant. I think they should be exterminated, not paid. Sometimes you get like these really venal, just awful things that she says. I think they should be exterminated, not paid. It really puts into perspective how frustrated she is. And considering the fact that I'm laying this all out for you, a lot of these are usually reminders, because she'll keep going back to this year as like the blackest year of her entire life. And a lot of these I feel are reminders, because if you look at the resume, everything past October 1982 is just giant paragraph, dates, people, this is how they've wronged me, this is how they've done it, this is how they continue to do it, all of these things. She says, I can't get rid of phone or mail interferences, that's just something that I'm gonna have to deal with. All of the mailmen and workers at the post offices handed me mail addressed to my references and post office boxes in the general delivery stations of New York City. Basically, oh, they aren't respecting my anonymity of my post office box, they're just delivering it right to me. Someone, I don't know who, contacted all my previous acquaintances and persuaded them to do hostile, crooked things to me. This is obviously because I'm being set up and manipulated. It's not just because I'm insufferable. I'm reading insufferable from this. And, oh, need I forget, there's an ongoing NYPD, FBI, DOJ, NYC conspiratorial plot against her specifically. Need I mention all of that? By the way, all of that takes place in 1982. It doesn't get better. I'm like not even halfway through. In 1983, she will leave Mensa and write a novel as a vehicle for her as an actress of a major film. I cannot find any films that she acted in. I don't know if this is training, but I think she'll tell us, so don't worry. A man set her up to wreck in her motor car and then split the cost of repair bill with the mechanics. I was set up to spend a bunch of money on a car accident that wasn't my fault, even though I don't know if it was her fault. I don't know. I was set up to have a purse snatching in Queens, not because it's a high crime area. I was just set up. I was set up with a conniving, crooked Hungarian method. It's another one of those things. It's like the Slovene. Like, it always has to be weirdly ethnic.
You look vaguely ethnic?
I'm glad she sticks away from saying slurs. She will say African American, which I like. Thank you. Hungarian, weird call out. And she says, oh, people have been approaching my mother in the nursing home. Probably Christian Science people. She doesn't say it outright, but I would guess based on how it's been going. She also mentions that Schultz during this year and the Wadmans reneged on their promises, because apparently they made a bunch of promises that they were going to replace a car that was stolen, probably the one she wrecked, which they were also going to buy her book for $1 million, and lied about making her their heir and leaving her their apartment, and Walter Schultz would prevent her from making money by publishing her book. So I believe this is officially the point where she gets disinherited, probably because she is now a schizophrenic wreck with no extra money. But I mean, hey, if you want to leave your millions of dollars to be blown away by someone who gets things stolen from them and has a dedicated conspiracy set up against them, as well as wrecks their car and writes probably incomprehensible gibberish if her novels are anything to be held on. And that's just the things that occurred during the year. Things that go onward from 1983. New York City itself, the institution of New York City, did not want her to be successful or rich and prevented her from publishing anything from this point on. She could not produce any more intellectual properties because of meddling, so she is now no longer doing anything intellectually straining. Walter Schultz and the Wadmans keep tapping her phones, allegedly. Malicious, crooked schemes against her. This is another thing that she keeps pseudo-referencing, because she says, scheming against me, including direct quotes to information about me, they had illegally acquired through eavesdropping on the phone and illegally reading my non-published personal letters, journals, files, etc. that I kept in my apartment and that I never showed anyone. That is like her mantra. My non-published materials that people have read illegally, that I kept in my apartment and never showed to anyone. Walter Schultz also continues his meddling to call employers behind her back and cause her trouble. They also back call all her assets during this time, trying to get rid of all her financially valuable and relevant information. Walter Schultz specifically also eavesdropping, calling around, asking strangers questions, and telling them malicious lies about her, just random people on the street. Don't trust this Elizabeth Brady Cabot Winslow person, she's insane, which she probably is because she's just tweaking in her apartment with no money, because she then says the money, she was swindled out of money by the Wadmans because allegedly they said, oh, you're going to have a lot of money and a new car. Well, this is just the same thing again. Another reminder about how the Wadmans screw her out of a deal. And also another personal one, they sabotaged her car, someone, but that made her miss a relative's funeral. She doesn't say which one, but she says a relative, so the rest is just speculation. Something that actually is verifiable in this sea of unverifiable nightmare fuel is she works a lot of temp jobs in secretary, word processing, administrative support, all of those sorts of things. If it involves typing, if it involves secretary work, she keeps doing this. And she also begins to use computer word processing at this time. Also, remember when I said the Wadmans were going to replace her car? The Wadmans, Walter Schultz, and two other people who aren't cool enough to mention again will steal her car, along with crooked NYPD people. It's not because it's Queens and it's a high crime area. No. All of these people have to corroborate to steal my car. She also has all of her cash and a major credit card stolen. She also then says how the Wadmans pump and dumped her on a book. She gets more phone calls about details that she had not told anyone about because they were in private and unpublished material. Also, apparently this is where the Wadmans lose interest in eavesdropping and swindling her out of money. And from this year on, that's the stuff that happened in 1984, here's the stuff that will continue. Employers will cause trouble, maliciously by the way. They will cut her out of her acting career and temp work, illegally through phone calls and hostile tales. These employers will also place hostile and crooked co-workers in the office with her to cut her off of employment and fire her deliberately. She also continually could not publish in New York City because of the crooked circumstances imposed on her. Crooked is one of her favorite words. I kind of like it. It's very old-timey. She also then says every employer that she would work on from now on is crooked and scheming against her. And she was also falsely told that she was just being sued and would be taken to court at any time, but that's just not true apparently because all of her legal experience, or I don't know, just her being generally insane. Moving on to 1985, she no longer has any social life due to illegal phone tapping and concealed surveillance. She also says someone tried to scare her out of her apartment and to move to Atlanta, Georgia through poison and malicious lies. She was then illegally forced out of her apartment anyway by a group of others, including Walter Schultz. In a later reminder, she will also include the cops, the fire department, and post office workers of wiring her apartment, concealing cameras, and disrupting her mail to get her kicked out of her apartment. She says crooks plagiarized and stole non-published materials and then sold it. Walter Schultz and some others ganged up behind her to get her thrown out of her apartment, which they succeeded. Schultz then also goes to the St. Bernard's Episcopalian clergy and says that she was paranoid about phone taps, which unironically I think Walter is right. I assume this is how it played out. She goes to the Episcopal clergy and says, hey, this guy is wiretapping my house. Walter Schultz then goes to defend himself and says, no, I'm not tapping her house. And she then says that he is deliberately lying because she knows and he knows that he has tapped her house. She also says that the NYPD allegedly faked a security check to set up more surveillance devices. Are you getting a theme yet? Man, I love illegal surveillance. Wow, it's all around me. I think she's more surveilled than Frances E. Deck is, because at least Frances E. Deck can hide. It seems every time she moves anywhere, even one micro instant, 16 federal and non-federal agencies, as well as a bunch of individually interested parties, are just going around and tapping her stuff for no reason. Like, why? What reason is there that she is pursued by so many different people, other than she is the most targeted individual? Gang stalking, whatever. Continuous events from 1985 on will be letters and invitations from and meetings with relatives and former acquaintances, which she allegedly says to be forged and then names a bunch of people who are forging them, as well as this is where she gets weirdly prejudiced, where she says, yes, this Pakistani
I just meant, like, you know, exotic
newsman on the corner, as well as naming a bunch of different nationalities.
Stop. Please, just Stop.
of her neighbors in her apartment are stealing her mail and reading it, and also conspiring and impersonating people who she wants to talk to. So she has this multi-ethnic oppression. It's no longer named people or federal groups. Now it's a little bit racial, but I'm glad she doesn't use any slurs in her resume, probably because she wants to get hired. In 1987, proceeding, we're out of the woods. I'm going to tell you that was probably the last most congested year. We're going to have a bit more quicker ones. In 1987, she says that a gang of lawyers and word processors illegally contributed to the horrific death of her mother. And at this time, she also forgets or doesn't care anymore about the Wadmans reneging on their promises, and Schultz gives up maliciously calling her employers to get her fired. From 1987 on, she will now accuse a bunch of lawyers, maybe it's just the paranoid schizophrenia, maybe it is just lawyers being lawyers, will send her forged mail, bogus letters, bogus invitations, and other attempts to booby-trap her. This will continue until further noted. In 1988, someone set up a snare which was supposed to trap her and break her leg effectively, and she says she was slated for surgery like it's a bad thing, because she says, oh, I was slated for surgery, but luckily I escaped. I don't have to go to that observed room from my heavily observed room with all the other people tapping my stuff. Real sane. Real sane. She also says that the NYPD will update their surveillance methods during this time, getting new equipment, tracking, and surveillance devices. And she says the behavior was hostile, crooked, harmful, and they were obviously baiting and hazing and threatening me. It's the equivalent of low-tier bait. Low-tier bait, Fed. Try something else. Why don't you
should build a barn.
No. Continuing to 1989, things will look up a little bit, as one of her friends will set her up with a Walker Esquire, but will not last for long, as it is a blind date and says she will be drugged, which, not to do explicit things to her, but rather to get her to stumble in front of a cop as an excuse to get her arrested for public drunkenness, which they failed, of course, because she is such of high regal bearing. Her aristocratic bearing will shatter the wills of anyone else who's not as strong as her. Also, her phone line was cut at her employment, which led to her getting fired from her job. She says this is maliciously. I don't know if this is just because it's Queens. Wow, my favorite. It's like the Birmingham of the United States. Wow. Getting to more weird ones where she says, oh yes, I was probably, load bearing probably, I was probably deliberately given a heart attack in a crooked law office where I was deliberately overdosed and drugged to cause heart problems in a hospital. I love how she puts probably. Like, this is a little out of the scope. You know, everyone else trying to observe me and spy on me and get all my stuff and steal from me, those are obviously coordinated attacks on me as a person. The heart attack, though? No, it couldn't be. Probably. Most likely, but not guaranteed. Like all the other things. There is also new improvements in technology to worsen her position. She could not get any job and was being tailed, pursued, and cut off from employers and employment, and was hired by people who weren't actually hiring people. Wow, sounds like today. But this will lead her to stop working her temp jobs. So now she is completely out of employment. Well, in the late 1980s, possibly due to her schizophrenia and paranoia and anxiety, she is given an irregularly fast pulse. Might explain the heart problems, because remember, she's now around 40. Those things can start occurring if your health is bad. But she says it's a pharmacist giving me a deliberately fast pulse. She also says that the Barclays Bank in Queens where she had her account was bombed, which I could not find anything about, which makes me think it is just a complete fabrication, because I don't think anything would slip by the news about that. She's also cut off from all communication like she wasn't before. And another one of those weird, specifically racial things, she says this Haitian man deliberately gave me a large hematoma in my arm. Sure, just in general, the 1990s, she had her address book stolen, and another one of those, I think I was set up, for an assault in a Catholic shelter, which means she's not living in apartments anymore. She is now living in homeless shelters, and she was assaulted, not because it's a high crime area, but because deliberately I was set up. She also publishes a book during this time from 1990 to the 2000s called The Directory Directory of Geniuses, Directory of Prodigies, which is a variation of, if you'll forgive me for listing the whole title, the Directory of Living Prodigies, Living Prodigy Directory, International Directory of Living Prodigies, Directory of Prodigies, Prodigy Direction, International Directory of Prodigies. Cool. Get something published. I've never heard of it though. However, concretely, in 1990, another very eventful year. Probably the reason why she begins living in a homeless shelter, because she was forced out by her crooked landlord and others illegally cutting off her phone and mail employment search, aka she ran out of money. Her address book was stolen during this time, and all of her possessions, including 1,000 pounds of personal effects writing and 1,000 or so unusual and many irreplaceable books. A lot of stuff was stolen. Basically everything was stolen and sold without my knowledge. She goes completely broke at this time. She has her writings stolen from a Foot Locker in Northern Virginia, and these thefts will also be at bus stations, which are run by Greyhound, which she attributes to her cousin Ted Knappen, who's also a lawyer apparently, of setting these up. Not because it's a bus station and it's super easy to rob people there, it's just because it's Greyhound and her cousin works there and she obviously has to be set up. Obviously, the thefts will continue at Greyhound by African Americans. She will specify, I have never recovered any of my property. They're very low-grade sadists. Okay, maybe a little racially demeaning, but at least she's not using slurs. She's just saying, oh yes, these people are dumb, which, if you read the bell curve, you will find out that people are very easily conned into believing such things. And she is no longer suffering harassment from that multiracial group of people who she says was impersonating things and stealing her mail. Skipping 1991, in 1992, she then accuses Citibank guards of stealing her address book again from the lower level where she was sitting and put the names in my address book on their list and deleted them from directories and caused trouble for her. In the mid-1990s, she then continues to say, moving down to DC, that she has been repeatedly robbed, including thefts of her personal papers and documents. I don't know how many of these things she has. I have no idea how she keeps getting more stuff for people to steal. Either she is lying about how much is being stolen, or she just has that much to steal, which is another thing about her regal bearing. Her luggage carrier was stolen in 1999, which had many personal papers, including her IDs, which she names the NYPD and African Americans. Obviously, of course, those are the two people that I would name, or the two organizations that I would name. And she was also set up for an assault by a crooked NYPD officer, and her computer was repeatedly broken by library personnel and people who were supposed to repair it. In 2000, hooray! New century. She wrote and copyrighted a book. In 2000, she rejoins Mensa, and in 2001, she was electrocuted at a public telephone, which is not the proper term. I actually learned that if you want to use the proper term, it is shocked because you didn't die. Electrocuted is only if you die. She was assaulted on the street by a pervert who was colluding with the sheriff, local police, and EMS, as well as a hospital and local workers. And she is very sleep deprived during this time, where she blames the fact that she fell and embarrassed herself on the Greyhound bus company again for placing a large grease patch behind some objects in a bus station. And then, okay, the last year we have, because this is when the resume was published, 2002. She said she has not been hired, even though all these people have been inferior applicants to her intellectually. I want to say that. I don't know who else is applying to the positions that I'm applying to, but I'm so just tempted to be like, these people are inferior. But I mean, if I don't get picked, I mean, maybe I am actually the inferior one. I don't think I have that much of an ego to say, yes, they are inferior to me intellectually and in all other aspects. She also then complains about how the mean IQ for most jobs that she did in New York City is dropping, basically saying that my experience isn't worth as much as it used to be. And she got a second car, which was then stolen and towed by crooks, obviously not because she was illegally parking. They wanted to sell the car to pay for storage, obviously, and she then returns to New York City, which, as far as I know, is where she is today. She then ends with a bunch of whine. I'm just saying it as whining because she doesn't really say anything that you don't know. She doesn't say anything new. It's just complaining. And that's where her resume ends. That is everything we have from her in a dedicated timeline. But the timeline does not end here, as through a bunch of forum posts, this is going to go into the even less verifiable evidence, but I'm going to take it as true because I like building universes and having my little toy dolls play with them. So I'm going to play with my dolls and you're going to sit down and like it. We have an account in 2008 from a man named Owen. He claims that he saw Elizabeth Winslow daily from 2001 to 2008. Oh, by the way, these are going to be in chronological chronological order of the post date, not necessarily when their experience was, because I want to keep it as segregated as I can. She was dragging the suitcase, which would later be stolen, and Owen says that her neat style of dress would begin to decline as she would exhibit erratic behavior, as she had a, pretty strong mistrust of Black Americans or people who tried to occupy, quote-unquote, her property, which included her favorite bench in the park. Owen also allegedly talked to her, and usually she would say that she felt as if he had a trusting face, and if he could watch her possessions, mainly because she had such a fear of theft, which, if you're going through her resume, I would believe that she had an extreme fear of theft. He lists her last known location, and she was in an obviously haggard state, as if she's alive today, she would be in her 80s. We then move to one post from Jazz. Jazz is a very enlightening source. They have posted the most third-party evidence that I have seen. That's not from Elizabeth herself. That this first post says that she was a roommate of Liz's in the fateful year of 1982. Jazz said that she was a very interesting person that was suffering from some sort of illness. I believe it to be paranoid schizophrenia. That's just my personal guess. And Jazz says that it got so bad one weekend they decided to move out as quickly as possible the following Monday. Described as a sad, puzzling, irritating, and sometimes frightening person, and they don't know where she is now. An anonymous poster also says that this person has caught the bug. They're an outbreak worker trying to get her mental health. Recently spotted as of 2011, which is extremely outdated information, in Grand Central Terminal. They also mentioned the mental and physical health decline and seem to be anxious at their approach, as after approaching, Elizabeth began to throw up and become extremely afraid. Going to 2012, we return to Jazz, telling more stories about 1982, that fateful year that Liz was having her first experience with schizophrenia. Jazz says that she would be extremely strange about her phone. She would keep it locked up in her bedroom and only let Jazz use it if she held the phone at the base of the phone and dialed the numbers. She only let Jazz touch the receiver, so Jazz would normally use the payphone instead. Jazz also claims that Elizabeth claimed to have been attacked and hit in the head with a rock one day when she went out for a walk, but she claimed it's because the woman was jealous of her for trying to steal her husband, and she was frustrated the police wouldn't do anything. She went as far as to call a local mental health clinic to, quote, get that woman off the streets, unquote. When they wouldn't do anything, she became frustrated and hung up, and she said they, quote, started questioning her like she was the crazy one, unquote. And the highlight of this post, Jazz says, is that someone down the hall burned their toast, to which Elizabeth called the fire marshal, and when the fire marshal got there, along with the building manager, chewed her out for about 30 minutes, at which point Jazz gave 30 days, but she had an irrational breakdown, at which point it became basically 2 days notice as she moved out the next Monday. And just for the little bit of icing on the top, she refused to return Jazz's deposit. So probably a little too hungry for money. Jazz then goes on in more posts about her strange eating habits, saying that she ate the same thing every day, how it would always be one whole chicken, boiled, unseasoned, with some carrots or fruit. Anything she didn't eat, she would throw out. She also did have a set schedule despite not having a job. She went for a walk in the neighborhood, always wore a disguise because, quote, she didn't want any of her friends to recognize her. This disguise was usually a trench coat, a big floppy hat, and large sunglasses, almost like a stereotypical character disguise out of a movie. She'd be gone for about 30 to 45 minutes each time, upon which Jazz never went. She would also do her grocery shopping every week, buying the exact same thing every week. She went to the Library of Congress, allegedly, to get a new stack of books every other week, and allegedly she was doing research for a book she was writing, although Jazz was never allowed to touch them and only saw them about one time. She kept them in like a cart or a dolly for lighter weight things. Jazz also seems to corroborate the foreign language aptitudes because of a glimpse at one of the foreign language books. Jazz also says that she claimed to be a model, actress, and writer, although Jazz never saw any of the modeling photos that Liz had taken. Jazz also corroborates her trips to Europe, as well as allegedly saying that she was the part of Julie McCoy on the old show of Love Boat, which she was replaced because someone sneakily slept with the director behind her back. And Jazz doesn't know how sane that Liz was before the 4 months that they have lived with her, but Jazz claimed that she was completely insane. She was always paranoid, which in true Fantasy Deck fashion, one time she thought that all of the furniture in the apartment was bugged, so she removed all of the furniture from Jazz's room, as well as taking the rest of the apartment furniture and stacking it to the ceiling in her room, which she kept locked. The only furniture left out was one chair and a floor lamp, upon which she kept in the middle of the living room. Jazz tried not to be back as much as possible. And another story, one day, around 10 o'clock at night, she rolled in a wheelchair with a very old, small, frail-looking woman in it. The lady was covered in vomit and unable to speak, was awake and semi-lucid, but not able to move or communicate at all. They were left in the apartment like this for 20 minutes until Elizabeth Winslow came back, and she said the lady was her mother and had thrown up in her car, and that she was very frustrated. Which Jazz also comments that they were stunned because she had cleaned up the car before cleaning up her mother, which is really, really sad. And Jazz independently verifies the Christian Science poisoning of her mother from the nursing home in California, and apparently treated her mother very badly, yelling at her and having her mother cower in fear of her at effectively all times. And she also apparently still had money during this time, because Jazz says that Liz had a source of income. Possibly, Jazz speculates that she was living off of a survivor's benefit check from her dad's death, although possibly it might have something to do with her mom. Very unclear. There's also another one on another forum that Jazz makes. However, Jazz seems like they knew a completely different person, as when Jazz knew Elizabeth, she spoke in an almost prim and proper manner some of the time, but all of it seemed like it was put on. Like she had an old, delicate, fragile teacup and saucer that she drank out of. She would sip out of it like an aristocrat, but would do so while walking around in a shabby bathrobe. Lots of contradictions. And Jazz expresses that she hopes Liz is getting help, as during the time that Jazz had seen them in Arlington, she had stopped wearing makeup and was pale and thin, but she did keep her long red hair almost down to her waist. And the last, most recent account we have of someone ever speaking with Elizabeth is a librarian in New York in the 90s, posted in 2014. Would have run into her of late March of 2014, saying not much has changed and echoing my paranoid schizophrenia speculations, and apparently also memory problems, as apparently it was like,
You killed my... Yes, I killed your father. What is it with you women anyway? I killed my father too, and you don't hear me whining about it.
Despite infuriating me for years, she never remembered me. But the poster, named Rich, says that despite her desperate illness, he's still happy to see her alive and somehow making do. So, that is all of the documented evidence that we have of her, and you've been seeing the photos and such of her through the years. I've tried to keep to her good side, quote unquote, back when she was sane and not letting herself go, and I hope you've appreciated it. In summary, Elizabeth Brady Cabot Winslow was born in the 1940s. An era she never truly left, when everything was about lineage and experience, and if you got a job as a secretary, that was enough to bring you through the entire rest of your life. She always took pride in her military background and adored her father, while shunning, if not outright rebuking her mother. Her early years were good. She was a doctoral candidate. I don't know if she ever got her doctorate, but I don't believe so. And she is a well-studied person, going from Japan to Germany to France to Italy, all the way around the world. However, she would suffer the death of her father, which would trigger the onset of her paranoid schizophrenia. After this, she would see nothing but shades and crooks searches and illegal seizures of anything. These high crime areas that she lived in weren't just random tragedies. These were targeted hits against her specifically. All of the wrongs of the world couldn't be against someone of her bearing, her stature, someone of her lineage. She couldn't suffer these type of things. They had to be coordinated. These had to be coordinated things that she couldn't control. All of these are illegal. All of these are grievances she suffered against her will. And up until present, if her fate is good, she has never left the world of delusion, where everything is set up against her. She's always surveilled, constantly looked at, everything plagiarized, nothing original. Everything seems to sink into a pit of despair. And that's just the life she has to live. Scorned her mother, had to take care of her in decrepitude, and frankly looked down upon the entire world, scorning those whom deserved it and those who didn't. The only one who was deserving of anything, though, was her, Elizabeth Brady Cabot Winslow. This is the end portion of the video. I don't know how to do endings, so let me state first that I'd like to thank you for watching. I did try a new video style, and I do want to thank you for giving me 2 weeks on this video, as I really did need it. I would encourage you, if you made it this far, to please like, comment, and subscribe. It is a arduous process to make these, and for the time investment, it's really the least you can do. I'm not asking you for money, I'm just asking for you to make the number go up and make my ego as big as Elizabeth's. As for advice that I can offer you in this trying time, well, just remember, even your unpublished work that you have never shown to anyone else can be illegally stolen against your will by crooks and vandals.